It almost feels like cheating putting a series like Warhammer 40k on a list like this, and that's because this universe and all its rich lore started back in the 80s with tabletop and books, and for decades since, countless stories and additions have been added on to this utterly captivating fictitious world, which is now one of the most well-known out there. So well known in fact that its reach has sprung well into the realm of games as well, with now countless different spin-off series or mainline entries that give us a deep dive into one of the most hardcore and unrelenting sci-fi dwellings ever. The universe of Warhammer itself began 60 million years ago, when massive powerful beings known as the Old Gods began to see different worlds in the universe with life. These strange beings got their powers from another alternate side dimension known as the Warp, which is a realm born of nothing but pure energy and emotional chaos. However, at this time, the Warp itself was quite tame, and in many ways served as a beneficial dimension of raw power to form life. With time though, this would change. During this period, a massive civilization known as the Necrontyr, who had been given life by the Old Gods themselves, were beginning to struggle with their dying star and lack of power, and went to the Old Gods seeking the secrets of immortality. But when they were turned down and swiftly destroyed, they retreated with their remaining armies to the furthest corners of the dark and unexplored galaxy. Here, they stumbled upon a C'tan, or ancient sun god that had been formed during the Big Bang, which was in the middle of devouring an entire star. Currently nothing more than a mindless vessel, the Necrontyr pooled all of their resources to build a gargantuan suit for the C'tan to wear, which gave it sentience to once again think, after which it tricked the Necrontyr into banishing their souls and becoming its slave, turning them into the fearsome warrior culture known as the Necrons. For years past this point, galactic war raged on, with millions upon millions dying and countless worlds being vaporized to oblivion. The Old Gods had not anticipated such a large offensive from the C'tan gods they saw as rivals now, and the Old Gods only barely were able to eventually achieve victory by not only summoning their own gods for this war in heaven, but tapping into the powers of the Warp as well to use it offensively. But because the C'tan were gods of reality itself, destroying them would destroy reality, which meant that instead they were simply beaten and imprisoned to submission. And with that, the Necrons decided that they could no longer best the Old Gods, and their leader, known as the Silent King, gave an order for them to hibernate for 60 million years, only to come back when the civilizations of the present had weakened themselves out of pure hubris. So for millions of years, the Old Gods and eventually their predecessors, the Elders, kept a firm reign over the galaxy, literally committing mass genocide in order to cull any species that seemed dangerous, which even led to the creation of dumb and fearsome space orcs we see in the game nowadays. Eventually though, the Elders' great civilization began to fall, because the leaders became naive in their easy lives, and many of the population was becoming bored, which slowly led to massive blood sacrifice orgies where entire worlds became host to the most debaucherous acts imaginable in order to keep people entertained. And just like with the fall of Rome, this moment of weakness led to another conflict that would end the Elders as we know them. Around this time, humanity was reaching a new golden age, which by the way in the Warhammer 40k universe takes place in our same timeline. So while Earth and humanity was advancing, all this crazy stuff in other parts of the universe was happening at the same time. At this point though, humanity had discovered something known as the warp drive, which allowed them to quickly traverse through portions of the warp to travel faster than light, which allowed us to colonize thousands of planets quickly, and in no time our power grew. This eventually led to us finding and coming into conflict with the Elders though, and on top of this, a massive event occurred where our artificial intelligence robots turned against us and started killing people. And to make a bad situation worse, the Elders had caused even more problems within the warp, which cut off large portions of humanity from one another as they could no longer traverse the warp to get to other planets, limiting trade and leading to the death of many off-worlds. And also, because of the new instability of the warp, many humans started to gain strange psychic abilities and powers and became known as Psykers, who would often be taken over by space demons to cause chaos. All of these problems eventually led to humanity's darkest moments, where a giant nuclear war began on Earth, or Terra. And in this fateful moment, the only thing that could save them was a human being god hybrid who came to be known as the Emperor. This man, born through blood sacrifice even before the time of Christ, took over as the supreme leader of humanity in order to save them from their doomed state. And capitalizing on his opportunity, he created a super powerful army of space marines and their armadas that would venture into the galaxy to destroy the Elders and take on anything else in sight. And honestly, from here on, things get absolutely insane, with so many different ages and events taking place, as well as new races and wars that are so notable. After all, there's a reason that this series is called Warhammer, and that's because the universe is in a constant state of conflict that is bloody, fierce, and unrelenting. But throughout it all, the lore on offer here is just so amazing too, with many deep explanations of sci-fi concepts and ideas that more than most series really focus on the fantasy aspects as well. It's one of the things that makes the Warhammer series so special as a franchise. It feels like the deepest sci-fi and fantasy world you've ever seen at the same time, with a whole lot of blood, sex, gore, and rock and roll. It's an 80s nerd's fantasy at its best, and for me, especially after playing games like Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, you can't help but fall in love with this universe. I mean, seriously, in that game alone, you get to see what are called the Navigators firsthand, who are human mutants who have a gene that allows them to use their third eye to peer into the perilous warp and guide human ships through them safely. Or what about the thousands of crew on the lower decks who are treated horribly, while the rich and powerful on the top decks live in luxury? These are ships housing literally thousands of people at once, and in order to keep them afloat, so much pain and suffering has gone on. And there's just so many fascinating concepts like this that are explored so much, all with world building and lore that you could literally do a 40-hour video series on and still only be scratching the surface. But if I can recommend one place to start, it's Rogue Trader, the thing that made me fall in love with this universe in the first place. Kirby for most people is nothing more than a cute pink sphere with a kindred smile, but behind those lovable eyes lies something more insane than you could ever imagine. You see, the universe of Kirby began millions of years ago, with an unknown and all-powerful creator known as the Void. This being of sorts feeds off life energy of the universe through positive and negative emotions, and when met with a massive amount of either, it will create new entities. At one point, an unbelievable amount of negative emotions started to flow through the god's soul, and from it, a foreboding evil monster known as Void Termina was born. Also referred to as the Destroyer of Worlds, Void Termina had the power to quite literally vanquish entire planets and form matter around its own body, causing the universe to live in fear of this behemoth. Luckily though, an ancient hyper-advanced civilization known as the Ancients devised a plan to fight back. The civilization was separated into two tribes. One, a sect of mystical architects that created clocks the size of planets that could grant any living being's wish. And another, a massive band of technological geniuses that created massive warships that could bend time and space around them, traveling through time if need be. So with their immense power and connections, the Ancients assembled a team of warriors led by Galactonite who were able to seal Void Termina away from the universe. However, fearing the power of this Galactonite, who seemingly was able to take down the monster on his own, the mystical tribe of the Ancients then sealed him away, which caused the technocrats to fear their power in turn, resulting in an all-out civil war. The mystical members turned back to Void Termina to unleash him back onto the world, and from then on, the universe has seen constant chaos, with countless worlds being swallowed whole by dark matter, and even some being turned into entire slave planets to serve their masters. And just when you thought this game for kids couldn't get any crazier, we get to Kirby himself, who is actually another god of sorts spawned from the Void, but this time with an endless flow of positive emotions. In the games, Kirby is tasked with taking on countless adversaries, most notably of all Void Termina, but this results in this little pink puff coming into contact with fat talking penguins or giant Cthulian void creatures that look like they're straight out of your nightmares. And along the way, Kirby has the ability to suck in foes in his way and swallow them whole in order to gain their powers, all in a bid to help him stop the evil in the galaxy. The truly horrifying part, though, is that while Kirby is technically always trying to do a good thing by stopping these powerful and evil beings, on his journey, he kills endless amounts of innocent people in his way. For example, when fighting King Dedede to stop him from taking all the food from Dreamland, Kirby's home on planet Popstar, he murdered thousands of people to get to Dedede. So it's crazy to think that for most people playing the Kirby games, games, they think it's nothing more than a fun and whimsical adventure with an adorable protagonist, when really, at the heart of it all, is a universe being swallowed whole by dark energy and evil forces. And it's the perfect example of why knowing the lore behind games is so awesome in my opinion. I can tell you personally, after learning things like this behind all these series, it makes me want to play them so much more. And when you do, it adds so much weight and intrigue to everything you're doing. If you've ever wanted to play a game that takes place in the mind of an artistic psychopath like H.R. Giger with Lovecraftian and cosmic horror galore, then there's no better place than Scorn. When you first begin the game, you awake in some strange alien-looking world, where structures seem to be being eaten away and helpless bodies and skeletons litter the wasteland. You are a human being, with most of their flesh torn from the body, and sores and gashes protruding with blood leaking from every orifice. And as you slowly traverse your way inside a nearby megastructure, things only start to get more and more strange. You find contorted and mangled messes of human bodies that have been shaped into strange cauldrons, as well as symbols everywhere of birth and children, along with structures that burst with white sticky goo that blankets entire rooms. It's an oddly sexual and disturbing experience, and the more and more deeply you dive into the game and its story and lore, the more terrifying it gets. Towards the end, you discover a massive network of human brains connected to an interface, implying a shared human consciousness that was attempting to be built. And along with all the alien-looking creatures you encounter and fight, as well as the monstrosities that can only be described as nightmares, it's very clear something wrong has happened here. But maybe the most interesting part of all is the clues we get along the way. For example, throughout the entire time we play the game, we never actually meet any female characters. Instead, everyone's male. And when you arrive at some of the late game temples, constant iconography and statues of pregnant women and birth imply that for this civilization, making babies was everything. But that begs the question, what exactly is this unbelievably creepy civilization anyways, and where are we? Well, based on the clues we can deduce from this environment, along with all the statues of humans and aliens along with dead human bodies, it may just be Earth, but far into the future. Potentially, either humanity came into contact with an advanced alien species that transformed us, or we transformed ourselves. Maybe in the future, all women died out, meaning humanity had to develop in a way for men to give birth and continue life, which resulted in research into melding of the human body with technology and gruesome surgery. Whereas most futuristic depictions of humanity in sci-fi rely so much on robotics or transistors, Scorn takes the opposite approach, and revels in a world where humanity itself has begun a metamorphosis of sorts into a new being entirely. The facilities and lands we are traveling through are the remnants of this lost civilization that on its last legs constructed sick and twisted torture and experiments to enhance humanity as we know it, which even results in finding bodies of pregnant men or mutilated babies that can be smashed into a bloody mess. Without a doubt, it's one of the most petrifying game worlds I've ever seen, and the more you peel back the layers on the lore here, the crazier the symbolism and ideas in this title start to really flesh themselves out. And more than anything, even just walking around the halls or passageways here feels disgusting and gross, because no matter where you turn, you are met with scenes that will induce paranoia in you even days later. But it all does go back to that idea that grotesque and horrifying things can often make lore so much more interesting. And in the case of Scorn, despite how boring and mundane the actual gameplay can be, the world that holds it all up is a cocoon that is bursting with unbelievable revelations. For someone like me that absolutely loves good lore and world building in games, you think I would adore FromSoft series. The thing is though, while they are home to some of the coolest and most unique lore out there, they are also home to some of the most convoluted and hard to parse narratives you can play. I love a good mystery just as much as anyone, but when that mystery comes in the form of endless books full of nothing but riddles, or environmental and character storytelling that is vague to the point of absurdity, it can get a little tiring. Having said that though, Bloodborne specifically has such an insane backstory that you can't help but be enthralled by it regardless. In the game, many years before we play, play, the Chalice dungeons we enter for loot were home to a great and lost civilization, whose makeup consisted of the Pthumerians and the Great Ones. The Great Ones were massive brutes and beasts that looked like a mismatch of different alien species and held great power. And because of how unique and dominant each of them were, they sought to keep their lineage going by producing offspring with the Pthumerians. The cycle continued for some time until a great event occurred of which we know little about. Seemingly, a handful of the Great Ones started to die, while others transcended into something even greater, beyond comprehension. And after this great schism, the Pthumerians were left alone to fend for themselves, but because of a great plague known as the Plague of Beasts, presumably caused by the blood of the Great Ones, this ancient civilization was desecrated and left to rot. From the ashes, years later, a group of scholars stumbled upon these cursed lands, and during their excavations, the blood of the Great Old Ones was unearthed. So for years, societies began to flock to these lands as tales of medical miracles taking place spread like wildfire, with multiple different factions creating blood magic and serums that could heal any ailment or bend the fabric of space itself. Over time, though, this utopia of sorts began to crack at the surface. People were beginning to turn into Cthulhian monsters and beasts, stalking other townsfolk and drinking their blood like animals. And to counteract these monsters, an organization known as the Workshop was created that in the dead of night would train and send out beast hunters who would quell the growing tide. But with time, as more factions stumbled upon dormant Great Old Ones or mysterious blood rituals, the town and surrounding area we see in Bloodborne became agents of pure chaos. When we play as a beast hunter in game, we venture out to destroy the monstrosities of the blood of ancients, carrying a melee weapon in one hand and a firearm in the other. And along the journey, we stumble upon so many strange and harrowing monsters that speak in nightmares of terror. Like many other FromSoft titles, it's a series that is extremely dark and hard to understand, but the more you read and really take in everything around you, the more you can slowly paint a picture as to what really happened. And more than anything, the dreary nature of this setting adds so much to the lore, with constant blood, sacrifices, and horrific events that culminate in a world that is hard to look at, but impossible to pull yourself away from. I know I mentioned that FromSoft games can almost be too pretentious sometimes in how they present lore, but it does make for such fun discussions about what these stories are, where rather than being consumers being entertained, the community acts more like archaeologists revealing to the masses the history of a forgotten world. It's a playbook that I think most games and series should at least look into taking from, but it can get tiring at times too.